And looking at our student example with Kaya, how did the student example compare to the teacher example?
So she was able to make a clear claim in her first sentence. In my teacher example, I said Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred, connects with the stranger because they both comment and explore the concept of human apathy, which was a theme that we talked about in great detail, especially near the beginning of the book. And her claim was A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes is asking the question of what happens to a dream when it is put on hold. And then right away she goes in connecting that to the character of Micheaux and him doing what Langston Hughes refers to as carrying a heavy load. And she says because his emotions were things that weighed heavy on him. And so right away she starts off with a claim. Her claim is different from my claim, but they're both correct. And then she's able to provide key supporting evidence quite soon after that from the poem, connecting it to the main character of The Stranger.
Awesome. I noticed that as well. Does the student offer anything that maybe your exemplar doesn't? They seem to mimic each other quite closely.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
The one thing she does differently is she made it her own in the sense of she didn't just take what I wrote and just repeated all the details. She focused a little more on his emotion. We both used the heavy load quote from the poem, but I did it in the sense of him going to prison later in the book and the heavy load of killing somebody, where she does it at the beginning and looks at it in the emotions of how he deals with his mother's death and also deals with his emotional feelings for Marie and his relationship with his friend Raymond.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move forward and really kind of recognizing the gap. So we're going to take a couple minutes. What are the key gaps in the rest of the student work and the exemplar?
Yeah.
And feel free to take your time. If you've already reviewed and you already kind of see some things, let's go ahead and share.
Well, in the middle one's interesting because her annotations were high, but then her 100 words was a little lower because this student she paraphrased. So she used text evidence. It was not direct quotes from the poem, and she used no direct quotes from the book. Clearly she understood the poem, and clearly even more so she understood the book. But she did not really get into that deep connection. She just kind of made claims about the stranger, made claims about his dreams not quite happening or him being offered opportunities and not taking them. And then she wrote a little bit more about apathy, and then and then connected his dream ended syrupy sweet, and she says this because he realized and accepted many things, and this led him to being less apathetic and more empathetic. So I see where she's coming with that, but it doesn't quite get to the how, why, and so what. It doesn't quite answer the prompt in the same way that our exemplar or high level student work does.
All right.
And then in the lower one, again, hers was so low. Her annotations were almost nothing. I think she did, one vocabulary annotation and made a quick claim. But she did not follow the annotation guidelines, so that made it low. And in addition, she only used a quote from the story and not from the poem. She actually uses a couple of quotes from the story. Let me look through here. Yeah, and she focused on the sun, which also I mentioned in my exemplar, but she focuses on the sun, and she does paraphrase the drawing up like a raisin in the sun from the poem, and she states that it connects to the book because they're both in the sun, which that's not really the deep connection I'm looking for, right? Just because they both talk about the sun doesn't mean that they have the same meaning behind that. Okay. And I wanted them to delve a little bit deeper and not looking at surface level word choice, but rather the meaning of the words, like we see here. You know, how do the meaning of the words and the phrases used in the text, including figurative and connotative meanings, add to the understanding. And so she named it, but she didn't describe it. She didn't ask why, how, or so what, and really hit this quote.
Very, very good. Standard. Because, and then what I took from this in relation to really punching the misconception understanding, I feel that the student mastery comes where they start analyzing the cumulative impact of specific word choices on meaning and tone. Yep. And so clearly the middle part of our 10.4 is really our gap. Yep. And it kind of follows along what you're saying, going to that deeper meaning, that deeper sense of how these two texts connect, and then also kind of subjectively kind of putting in that emotion of like, how does this make you feel?
Yeah.
In general, so.
And you mentioned the data earlier with vocab quiz B. And vocab quiz A and B, they tend to do quite well on, because A is matching, memorization, that's easy. And B is writing in the definitions in your own words, again, easy. Quiz C is where they struggle, because in quiz C, they actually have to apply analytical skills to realize, okay, is this the right connotative meaning? Is this the right contextual meaning of the word? And that's where, again, we see that gap in both their testing and we see it in their analysis.
Excellent. Okay, so now that we see the gap, let's punch and plan a reteach. Let me check on my video here, see if we're still recording. Excellent. We are? All right. And so I'd like to know what you think in relation to our reteach structure. Do we think we need to should we model or provide a guided discourse? And when I say model, something where you are really showing that exemplar and then allowing students to really complete their work kind of based on that first model. But guided discourse is when we have about half of the assignments are actually meet your expectations, so then we can actually use what some of the scholars have already produced and actually kind of help scholar to scholar really kind of close that gap and find whatever they might have missed in their writing, what can they kind of add based on what they see from their peers. So.
I think a guided discourse would be really good. In fact, I think it might be neat to put the poem up on the board and have us annotate it as a class, and then write together 100 words, like as a class do it, so that they can not only learn from one another but also lead in the learning. They did get to see my exemplar prior to doing the assignment, and some of them used it a lot and it was evident in their writing, but a lot of them did, especially my higher level class. They looked at it and they're like, okay, I got this, put it to the side, and then just on their desk had their stuff, which is really what I want them to do with an exemplar. I don't necessarily want them to have my exemplar on their desk while they're doing it, unless they need that extra guidance and support. It entices
them to just kind of copy.
Exactly. And I saw that more in my lower level class, where they, and there were some students, I told them, I said, you can't use all the direct quotes. I said, if there's something that you want to use, like Kaya wrote about the explosion, she wrote about the explosion differently than I wrote about the explosion. So that was fine. You can use the same quote, but you have to do something different with it. Or you can use the same idea, but you have to use a different quote. Excellent.
And so this would be, now we're sparring. So I didn't give us the map, but we are sparring. So I wanted to really see what you figured, what your plan would be of action. Yeah. So it definitely resembles mine, where I want to call on students to really identify their thinking.
Okay.
Right? And so I'm going to actually share out our high exemplar and let students be able to analyze and kind of read and compare it to their own.
Okay.
And specifically, I would not share out the low exemplar, but they would just be compared to their own work. And now scholars who, I might use a variation of exemplars, not just one, to kind of give students really that motivation to continue that great work. But then I literally ask God, okay, what did this scholar do, right? And I would push for clear answers when they haven't completely ID'd the successful strategy necessarily. Once I see potentially incorrect responses, I would really ask my group, okay, do you disagree, or do you agree or disagree with this answer? In this fashion, normally you would see students who, as it through the guided discourse, that, no, I think I see some variation and some modification that we might be able to make. And so, okay, so then what is the error? Waiting for responses. And then once I get what I need, I stamp that understanding. I think my questioning to the students to stamp their understanding at the end of the reteach lesson would be one, what are things to remember when completing a word synthesis? Mm-hmm. That's one thing I want my students to know, so how they format this response. And then I really want them to name the conceptual understanding that I want them to see, and maybe also identify what misconception they had previously.
I like that, yeah.
And then have scholars really put it into their own words. And so now that we've kind of see what we need students to do to get back on the right track, during their independent practice, I want you to kind of think of what will your monitoring labs look like as you're aggressively monitoring the students as they're going into their writing time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think first I would look for their claims.
Okay, so first
and generally when I'll go around with my clipboard and do that, I'll have a red marker and a green marker, and I'll put a green dot on their paper just saying I approve your claim, a red dot if I don't like their claim. And I'm very vocal with them, like, now I'm coming around to aggressively monitor your claim, so they know exactly what I'm looking for, since some students may be ahead or behind. If they then have that red mark, I'll go another round and then check all the reds and hopefully make them green. Of course, we do have some students that if they're unable to make that red to green, then just a
and that might be
would
be your small group instruction where you might want to give them some more scaffolding.
Yeah, and they can sit with Miss Robinson and kind of get that done. The second would be a direct quote from it would be their first direct quote. It can either be from the poem or from the book. And again, that would be a green if I see that. I don't know if I think it would be very rare for me to use a red, unless the red would come in with the second quote. And it would be, does that second quote and your analysis in between match? So that second round would then be a double round where I would look at their analysis and make sure then that their quote matches the analysis, if that makes sense. So the middle one is kind of an easy, like, oh, you have a quote from the book, good. You have a quote from the poem, good. But now let me see how you use that.
And then your final lap, what are you thinking of?
The final lap.
Or you kind of combine the laps
the final lap. Yeah, it would be 3 laps, but the last lap would be double duty. The third lap would be double duty. Analysis quote. And the second quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So, excellent. Thank you. I want to. When do you think you'll be reteaching this?
Probably we're going to do a similar activity, I would say a week from tomorrow, a week from Wednesday.
So for, let's say the 7th to 24th, since we're on spring break?
Oh, yeah, spring break, duh. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
2 weeks from Wednesday then, yeah.
Okay. All right, and then when will you be reassessing on this standard?
That Thursday or Friday after.
Okay, 4/25. All right. And then when can I get that follow-up data?
Friday. Cool. The Friday following.
4/26. All right. And so just to kind of the scaffolding additional lessons, just be thinking about how you can maybe incorporate these lessons, whether it's reteach into your do now, your homework assignments, and then any type of modified independent practice.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, thank you for your time today. I can't wait to see you. I believe maybe the week, probably that first week of May.
Nice.
And then we can definitely follow up. So
Awesome.
thank you for your time.
Yeah, you're
Cool.
welcome.